Behind the Covers, peeling back the covers to reveal what it really takes for authors to get from concept to publication and beyond. Each week, host and author Brandy Miller invites you to join her and her guest to share the journey of getting our books out of our heads, onto the page, and out into the world where it can make a difference in your life and the lives of others. And now, host, author, and chief executive storyteller for 40daywriter.com, Brandy M. Miller.
Welcome, 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 cherished friend. Come on in. It is time for another episode of this week's Behind the Covers. We've got Randy Weir. He's going to be talking about his book, The Case of the Invisible Souls. I'm really excited to have him, really excited to have the two of you connecting together. His journey is for an independent author, not that uncommon, but he does have some really cool things to talk about. And I do want you to listen in, because every time you hear from one author, you learn something new. You gain something new. You gain an insight that you didn't have before. And that's my goal, is to help you get all the insights you need to find the courage to step out and share your own story, because I know you've got one in you. Matter of fact, this week, this Thursday, I am going on a 4-day conference in California called the Message to Millions Conference. And it's hosted by Ted McGrath. He's a master of helping people take their stories and turn them into things that work for them. And one of the reasons I'm going to that conference is because I want to help you get more out of what you already know how to do. I want to help you reach the world in a bigger way, in a better way, in a way that has more impact for you and for them. And so I'm hoping that when I come back, I'm going to have some insights to offer that I didn't have when I left. But that is what's going on in my world. Also, we're going to have another of the Kids Can Write workshops. It's going to be February 24th. It's also a Saturday, February 24th, from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. at the Inglewood Public Library, just like this last one. And so I'd really love to have you there. Remember, it's $50 a kid. The adult comes for free, but I do want an adult with the kid. If you have 2 kids and 1 adult, that's okay, but I don't want any unaccompanied kids, because some of the things that we're going to be doing, it's just going to be easier to do if there are more adults to help. So that's what's going on in February. I hosted my webinar. If you missed it, there's going to be a replay. Haven't gotten it out yet, but there will be a replay. Now, I really want to encourage you to look for that replay, because it's going to have some eye-opening content. It's going to help you look at art, science, math, and yes, writing in a totally different way. Now that I've talked about all that stuff about me, let's get down to meeting Randy together. I want to invite you to grab a cup of coffee in the kitchen, take your shoes off, get comfortable, and let's go talk to Randy Weir. Welcome, Randy, to the Behind the Covers podcast, where we are peeling back the covers on those books to reveal what it really takes for an author to get from concept to publication and beyond. So give us your full name or your pen name for today's audience.
Well, basically, it's R. Weir on the books, so it isn't much of a hidden thing. Randy is actually the name, but I had a little trepidation about putting my full name on there with all the identity stuff these days, so I kind of just shortened it on their novels and made it R. Weir instead.
Totally understand. So what is the title of your book?
Well, the most recent book is actually just a short story. It's just on Amazon eBooks only. It's called The Case of the Invisible Souls.
Interesting. So tell us what that book is about.
Well, it's part of a series. I have a private detective named Jarvis Mann who lives in the Denver metro area. So he's a local Denver author, local Denver detective, which I live here in the Denver area. And he is helping out a homeless veteran who asks him to try to figure out why some of his other homeless friends are just in the area where he lives. They seem to be just kind of just vanishing. And so he does a little pro bono work, and he actually goes undercover as a homeless person and gets a sense of what it's like being homeless, living on the street. So, and finds out there's some shady dealings going on. You know, things are never as they appear to be, as in most mysteries. So, yes, and he it's about a 16,000 word short story. So it's a fairly quick read, but kind of the continuation of my series. So.
Awesome. So what is the titles of the series?
Well, it's just the Jarvis Man Detective Series is what it says on there, on most of the books. And there have been, that one was the 6th in the series, and I have a 7th one hopefully coming out first of the year. It's going through beta readers right now. I'm getting some feedback from them. So.
Interesting. Let's talk about beta readers. Explain what beta readers are for those members of our audience who don't know.
Well, you can do alpha or beta readers. Beta readers are usually kind of after you've finished the book, at least in your mind it's finished, and you send it to them and they kind of critique it for you. They kind of read it. Some of them give you more feedback than others. Some do, you know, a lot of editing and say, you know, this, you got these misspellings and things like that. And others just give you basic feedback on, is the story works? You know, is there any holes in the plot? You know, does the plot not work in places, or this person here but here they're not here and they should be, you know, those type of issues and stuff. So it's very helpful. I have a group of about 7 or 8 beta readers that I've relied on through the years that have kind of built up, and then some, you know, can't do it anymore. So I find, you know, try to find a few more, but I try to get as much feedback as possible, and it's very helpful.
Awesome. That sounds like a really good idea for any writer.
Yeah, it's very helpful to use them before I send it to an actual editor. Try to get the book hopefully as good as it can before it goes to the editor, though unfortunately you can't ever catch everything no matter what you do.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's humanity. What are you going to do?
Yeah,
and the machines aren't really any better right now, so. Yeah.
No, they sure aren't.
Yeah, so, all right, is your book published just on Amazon, or is it available everywhere?
Well, the latest, the short story is only on Amazon. A couple of my earlier books, I have another short story, which was kind of technically the first in a series of 1 novel, are available just about everywhere now. So, you know, iBooks, Google Books, Smashwords, Barnes and Noble, you know, a few other small ones. So yes, and I put those down through Draft to Digital. So, you know, there's a lot of different services that Draft to Digital automatically publishes too. So
cool.
But my later, after those first 2 books, they're all Kindle only, and you can get book versions of them too, or soft paperback versions, and then they're also on Kindle Unlimited too, the last 4. And the new book will probably be Amazon only, at least for a while. I kind of dig into Amazon at first, and then as the book's been out for a while, then I gradually start moving them out into more. And I mean, you know, Amazon, like them, love them or hate them, they're pretty dominant in the market. So
they definitely are dominant in the market. I know a lot of booksellers hate them. But my way of thinking is, if you've got Goliath in the room, you need to use Goliath's momentum in your favor, not fight him.
Yeah, I mean, you absolutely have to use them because they do own whatever it is. They do whatever it is in the market. The only bad thing is they really have driven the prices down, so they really squeeze what money you make. I guess good for consumers, but it's not so great for authors.
Yeah, it's true. It is true. They kind of cap it. You know, you get your highest royalty starting at $2.99, and if you go above $9.99, then you don't get your high royalties anymore. So it does kind of put a pinch on there.
Yeah.
So, who is the intended audience, would you say, for your book?
Well, anyone who likes mystery detective novels, twists and turns, They're kind of the old style noir type stories, the old
Okay,
days.
so
Mickey
film
Spillane
noir
and
kind of, yeah.
James. That's kind of the style. It's first person through his eyes. There are some moments, like in the new book, where actually there's some third person passages too. But they're anyone who likes twists and turns, who likes to be surprised. There's a little bit of language. There is some sex in the books as well. Like I said, they're kind of the old style, but they're kind of more modern storylines and twists. So, anybody 18 or older, unless you've got a teen who's really advanced readers, which some, in my day, teens never would have read that. A lot of teens now read stuff that are way beyond, and I would be shocked at reading if I was a teenager. But those are the type of people that really would enjoy my books. Obviously, the female audience is the biggest. I'd like to get more male readers, but I don't think men don't seem to read as much as women do. It's
Interesting.
too bad.
Yeah. So this obviously isn't the first book you've written. What was the first book you published?
The very first was the short story, The Case of the Missing Bubblegum Card, and that was the very first in the Jarvis Man series. So, but he helps a young boy whose Ernie Banks rookie card has disappeared. So they're into baseball cards and stuff. It kind of gets into that and the money, and then there's some lessons learned, things like that. He's a high school student.
Before you published your first book, how long had you been thinking about publishing a book? I mean, how long was it from the point where you started thinking, I think I'd like to write a book, to the point where you actually did write one?
Well, I wrote 3 novels way, way back, probably in the 80s, middle 80s or so, and that were never published. I said this was way before, independent publishing and stuff. And I sent them off and was rejected several times. And then I wrote the story, The Case of the Missing Bubblegum Card, probably late 80s, early 90s, and it just sat on paper in a filing cabinet. And it was funny, my wife read it, and she goes, "You really ought to think about this. This looks like a good, maybe you should look at independent publishing," which was starting in 2014 is when it was published. So it was pretty long gap between when I thought about it. And, I mean, obviously, probably would have never been published without independent capability.
Yeah, I think that a lot of people can say that the independent publishing has definitely opened up the board for people with new ideas and innovations and things that the traditional publishing industry wouldn't be willing to take a risk on. So
yeah, absolutely.
All right. So how long had you wanted to write a book before you sat down to write one?
Well, when I was in high school, I used to write poetry and never wrote so I did a lot of writing in those days. And as I've mentioned many times before with people, was to deal with teenage angst. Whatever was going on in your teen life. Now I write for middle-aged angst instead. So, but I wanted, I always had the ideas in my mind to write. And like I said, I finally sat down with an old typewriter, like I said, in the 80s. It really would have been even before personal computers, because personal computers really started mid-80s, late 80s.
Yeah, I think, that was when they really started to hit and take off, was about the mid-80s. Yeah. Yeah,
and you could get a word processor, and I could type okay, but it's like going back and correcting and whiteout and everything else. So it was really hard. And I remember even camping with a typewriter in a tent typing. It's always seemed very odd. Now you do it with a laptop. So there are a few writers that still like to use old typewriters, or even some like to handwrite out.
From what I understand, George R. Martin is a typewriter guy.
Yeah. Yeah, there's been a few, and they'd like to do it, or even do it through longhand. And yeah, for me, a computer made it much easier.
Oh, heck yes! I still enjoy handwriting and writing by hand, parts of things. But when I'm really serious about writing, it's at the computer. No doubt about it.
Yeah, and see, I can type much faster than I can handwrite. So the idea is sometimes my brain even works faster than I can type. So I get ahead of myself.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So how long did it take you to write your first book?
The very first one that never was published, it was probably a year at least, somewhere in there. Now, because obviously then I was working too, so you're doing it in your spare time, and most indie authors do have jobs, so it takes a long time. I always felt like I could knock a book out within a couple of 3 months if I wasn't working full time. You say yourself you can do that. Now, obviously, you get to points where you write, and then there's just so much you just have to stop because I got to stop, start again. But it probably took at least a year. And then once I got through that first one, it was a series also. The second and third ones seemed to come at least a little bit faster.
Yeah, I think that's the case with a lot of people. I mean, once you've figured out how to get a book written, the next one isn't as hard. Yeah, I think part of it is the confidence. You can do it.
Better at it too, I think. Obviously, you write after a while, and you get a little bit better at it, and don't have quite as many issues. But you hope you're getting better at it.
Well, I always encourage people to write their first novel, and expect to throw it away. Expect that the first one's going to be junk. But you got to get that junk out of your head first, and then you can write the good stuff. But
yeah, I keep thinking I'm going to go back to those 3 books that I never published and publish them again. But I'd have to update them quite a bit because they're very dated now. It's like 30 some years old.
Well, I would think
changed.
also you would bring more writing experience to the table. There are certain plot elements, I'm sure, that you would handle differently now than you did then.
Yeah, I mean, reading them now, I look at it and go, ugh, yuck.
Yeah, Exactly.
Why did I write it that way? But yeah, I'm sure there'd be a lot. It would probably be a pretty strong rewrite. And I'd take elements of it, I'm sure, but I'm sure there'd be a lot different.
Yeah, the first book I ever wrote, I know that, there's probably if I still had copies of it, and I'm not sure that I do, but I'm pretty sure there's matches, gasoline, lighter fluid would be involved because it was pretty bad. And, that's not the kind of thing you want to put out there, but those story ideas do linger, and the elements, bits and pieces of it. So have you ever encountered writer's block?
I really haven't. I mean, true writer's block where you're just completely, obviously you get the points in storylines where it's like, okay, where do I go with that? And maybe it may take you. But anytime I'm a little bit stuck, strangely enough, I actually will sleep. Before I go to sleep at night, I actually will go through the chapter in my head over and over and over again. That might take a day or two. And then a lot of times the idea will come to me. But true writer's block I really have never had, where it's just I can't write and I'm completely stuck and go weeks at a time without being able to write. I might get lazy and not want to write, but it's usually not because of writer's block.
Okay. Well, you already answered my question on how you overcome your writer's block. So that's a good tip, actually. Do you have a mentor in your writing? Do you have anybody that you go to for help and support?
I don't. I do have a PA, which helps with some of the marketing and stuff. So I go to her a few times, more for marketing issues than for writing issues. I recently started looking at meetup groups here in Denver that are for writers, and there's one here in town, and I may think about going to some of those to meet and talk with other writers and stuff. Like a lot of writers, I'm very much an introvert in a lot of ways. I am very good one-on-one, like this is great. When I'm in a crowd of people, I don't do as well. So it's a little harder for me and stuff. So I have to get beyond that somewhat. But, I'd love to find someone who writes a lot like I do and be able to bounce off ideas at times and stuff. And I do have a lot of friends on Facebook that I talk to occasionally about stuff like that too, but not really a true mentor.
Okay. All right. And so do you belong to a writers group? I think you're kind of answering this question already, but
Yeah, I'm not really. And like I said, I've started looking at possibly doing that, and see. Because a lot of
yeah.
people said, well, there's a lot of reader groups even out there that maybe you could donate your books to and stuff like that.
Well,
Those
there
are
are
some of the
book
ones that,
clubs, and that can be a really good
yeah,
source of finding people who want to read your work. But when it comes to writers group, I do have experience with that. I actually started one up here last month. But before that, when I lived in Elko, I ran one. And a lot of people will ask you, what's the point of a writers group? I'm like, well, it helps to have accountability, because that's part of what our group does is, you set goals for yourself and then you kind of hold your feet to the fire. Did you accomplish your goals?
right,
And, then talk about why not if you didn't. And, sometimes we can have bounce ideas off each other. And of course, it always helps to have a writer's feedback, because writers look at writing differently than normal people do. Normal people, if you ask them, hey, is my writing any good? They'll say, oh, sure, it's great. Or I loved it. Or I didn't really like
yeah,
it. But they can't tell you why. They can't tell
right,
you what was off about it. Whereas
right.
another writer usually can. So, but yeah.
Well, good.
So,
I may have to find out about your group and see
yeah,
if,
actually,
if
definitely. We'll talk later after after this interview.
right.
So, let's see. Who is your biggest supporter in writing right now?
Well, I would say it's my family is the biggest thing. I mean, obviously, when you write, you're going downstairs and you're locking yourself away and writing. And I recently stopped working for various reasons. It wasn't all just to write, but so I'm spending a lot more time on it now, not being working. I've worked for about 4 months now, I think, and so it gives me a lot more time. But obviously, my wife and my daughter are the biggest supporters, and they may not necessarily read my work and stuff, but they're there to help with.
Yeah, I can understand
and
that.
they leave me alone when I need to be left alone. Those are the things that it's good. They know when to leave me alone and when to say, oh, how's it going?
That's good. It's good to have a supportive family. I know it's very helpful. If it would be, I would like it if my family would read my work, but at least
Yeah.
they support me in doing it.
Yeah.
So have you, did you self-publish or did you choose a traditional publishing route?
Yeah, I'm all self-published. I decided not to go through the pains of doing all that. I've actually started looking to possibly go the more traditional route, but it's hard, obviously, and obviously they're being, they're picky. They're being hurt by the
Right.
Amazons and stuff of the world as well, and some of them come and go, and there are some shady ones out there, so you've got to be careful about who you hook up as well. So, but yep, totally self-published.
Good deal.
Got
All right.
all the expense, everything. All.
Yeah. So let's talk about your self-publishing experience.
Yeah.
What are some things that you have learned about self-publishing that you had no idea was the case?
Well, it's a lot of out-of-pocket money when you're a self-publisher, because you've got to pay for the cover, you got to pay for the mark, for an editor, and if you want a good editor, they aren't cheap. I mean, you look around, you can find some that aren't bad, but some are very expensive. The covers, to get a good cover made, you got to spend that money. And then the marketing is the biggest thing. That's the hardest part about it, and trying to find the right ways to market. And you've got to set up your newsletters, get people to sign up to come to your websites, and then there's a lot of giveaways. You got to give away to get people hopefully to read your books. And then if you get them to read your first couple and they're good, they hopefully will buy the rest. But it's a lot of upfront cost, I think, is as much as anything else. And at least for me, so far, the return has been very, very minimal in some ways. I mean, it's good. I've sold a fair amount of books, enough, but certainly I'm making a living.
I think that's one of the things that I have found is when people come to me for help with their writing, and I try to explain to them that the book is never going to be the thing that makes them the most money. Inevitably they're like, but I thought it was gonna. No, I'm sorry, it won't. It just won't. You can make a lot of money writing, but it's usually not the book that's going to make you the money. It's usually everything you can do with the book.
Yeah.
As you're right, it does take a lot to market. It does take a lot of work. It takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of attention. It takes a lot of consistency. If you want to sell books, that's just how it goes. So, let's see. Da-da-da. All right. So, what advice would you offer the would-be author listening to this podcast?
Well, get a lot of feedback from people if you can on your books. Obviously, you've got to write. That's the biggest. I mean, that's the first thing as a writer. You got to write. You got to find the time to write. You got to stick to it, and even if it's bad, you got to work. Sit down and write it, and then you go back and fix it later. Biggest thing. And then hopefully get some feedback and try to listen to the feedback. Hopefully it's constructive feedback. I've had some feedback that hasn't been very constructive sometimes, and it's hard to hear, but you do all that and then stick with it, and don't expect you're going to make a lot of money. I mean, there's the lucky ones out there. My last name is Weir, Andy Weir, who is a writer. We're not related. He and I have talked a few times and stuff, but he's one who has hit the jackpot with now just his second novel, and he's made loads and loads of money. And he was a true indie author with his first book, The Martian. And he actually published it a chapter at a time on the web. It's how he got a following and stuff. He's the rare exception. So, like I said, don't expect you're going to make a lot of money on it, and be ready to spend a lot of money, and be ready to spend a lot of time marketing and doing book events. I did 2 craft fairs in this last Christmas season. I've got another one I'm doing up in Boulder on December 17th, and it's those I've sold more books there sometimes than I have at actual author events. So I did really well there. So, but yeah, there's a lot of advice to get. The biggest thing is you got to write, and then try to get as much feedback as you can from people. You find that circle that you trust. It's going to give you the hard feedback and hopefully the constructive feedback.
Yeah, definitely. So you go to craft fairs and things like that to sell your books.
Correct. I do. I've done author events too. I've done several author events. We had one in Denver, down in the Cherry Creek area. Mm-hmm. It was in October. But I did 2 at the local high schools. I did one at Rangeview, which is my daughter's high school, and at Cherokee Trails, which is out in eastern Aurora. I did really well there. Sold really, like I said, more books than I've sold at any of the author events. And I've been to Louisville. I've been to St. Louis. I went to PennCon, which has been my best event so far. And that's a huge event in St. Louis. I've been to Louisville. Went to Deadwood, South Dakota this summer as well. I did pretty good there, and worked a vacation into that as well.
Always nice.
Yes, always. Hopefully the IRS is not listening on all that. But yes, the craft fairs, and I'm doing one in Boulder up at the Boulder County Fairgrounds. It's actually in Longmont, but the Boulder County Fairgrounds, December 17th, and it's a pretty big craft event. And I figure I kind of stand out a little bit at the craft fairs because most people are selling jewelry and clothing items and things like that.
So have you tried farmers markets?
We've had a couple of farmers markets I've not done yet, and I've thought about doing farmers markets. There's one out at Southlands, which is out here in East Aurora, and there's one in Longmont when we camp up there, and I've thought about doing that, but I've not done it yet. And again, it's a matter of picking and choosing because there's a cost, obviously the cost involved.
Yes,
but trying to do as many local ones are the best one because I don't have to worry about travel.
Yes.
The other events you've got hotels or I went to Deadwood. We took our motor home and did that, and did a family vacation at the same time. and I'm planning on going back. They're doing it again next year. I'm planning on going up there for that one as well. And that was a nice event. And it was the first year they did it, so it was a little bit smaller, and they're going to be a little bit bigger. But yeah, I thought about doing farm and market. I don't know how much they cost, so that's kind of one of the things I have to check on. The craft fairs are nice because it's usually about $80 to $100 somewhere in there. You know, if you have your own table and stuff, you don't have to pay for any of that.
Yeah.
I pretty much made my money back at the craft fairs, which is nice. At least, you know.
Yeah. I mean, at least you're breaking even.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Which is better than going in the hole. Much better.
Yeah. And you're always in the hole especially when you're starting out. I mean,
yeah,
well, like I said, a lot of upfront money you have to spend, and there are returns down the line. And as a writer, you can write a lot of it off. That's a nice thing on your taxes. And that's helpful.
It's a very expensive hobby. Yes.
yes, it is.
So, all right. Let's see. What do you wish you'd known when you first started that you have learned since publishing your book?
Probably the marketing side of it. I wish I'd known how much was involved in that and how hard it was and what works and what doesn't work. I mean, you know, I post a lot on Facebook, and I do get some sales off of that. And I never realized about building a newsletter, you know, following and getting people to sign up and what you have to do. So that's probably the biggest thing I wish I'd known. I don't know if it would have kept me from doing it, but it certainly would have. I would have thought, and I've had a couple of people I've paid to help me do that, but you know that gets to be expensive too. So
yeah, definitely. Well, it's good that you've had helpers. That's always nice.
Yeah, I wish they'd do it for free, but you know, they're not gonna do it just because I'm a nice guy. So unfortunately.
Oh, are you sure?
Yeah.
You know, the nice guy syndrome doesn't work.
Yeah, sorry. Saying please doesn't always work either. Saying please to be blue in the face.
All right. So now that you've got this book published, I know that you were expecting to publish your next book fairly soon. In fact, by the time this episode comes out, you'll have had it published. Is that correct?
I hope so. It's going to be January, February probably, and so yes, by the time this comes out, yeah, and it'll be the next one in the series, and it's titled The Front Range Butcher.
Ooh.
And it's a serial killer. He's actually chasing after a serial killer, and it's actually a serial killer from 20 some years ago, who then stopped, and now he's returned and has started up again, and they didn't catch him the first time. Now they're trying to figure out. So he's hired by a newspaper gentleman who's an author, works for a newspaper, a reporter, so to speak, here locally, and does magazine stuff. And he hires him to try to figure out who it is. And they think the newspaper person thought he knew who it was 20 some years ago, but they never could pin it on him. And now they're going back to this person, looking at this person again, and there's a lot of scenes where it's the detective Jarvis and him face to face with a little mind game thing going on. You know, he kind of admits that yeah, it's me, but he won't clearly admit it. And is it really him? Is it not him? And there are some other factors involved, which I won't do too many spoilers. But,
yeah, no, definitely. But yeah, that's great. So let me ask you a question. How many rounds of editing do you usually go through before your book is ready?
Well, I read through it myself numerous times, which to the point after a while, it's hard to self-edit because obviously you know the story, so you have a tendency to skip or skim sometimes. And they say read it out loud, which is helpful, and I do that. But I do at least 5, 6, and I do a lot of editing while I'm writing. So this was the longest book I wrote. It was 125,000 words.
Wow.
Books have generally been 70 to 80,000. The one before the short story, the Dead Man Code, was 90-some thousand. So this one was quite a bit longer. So as I wrote, I had to a lot of times go back and start at the beginning and read through to make sure I was keeping the plot, because I had a lot of plot variables in this book. There was a lot of things going on. So I had to do a lot of reading. So 5, 10 times probably, and then my beta readers, I get the feedback from them, which fixes a lot of things. And then I have an editor then that edits and everything before it's ready. And even then, you still miss a few things here and there. My last short story was probably the cleanest one I did, but it was only 15,000 words. This one's 125,000 words, so there's a lot of stuff in there that to get. So you try to get it as good as you can, but it seems like there's always a few things that slip through, which is, even when you have a good editor, they oftentimes can't catch everything as well.
Well, they get, just like you do, they get so familiar with the story at some points that it just like, they're going to miss things because of that.
Well, and I've had some editors tell me I got caught up in the story and I had to stop and go back because I was reading it as a reader, not as an editor.
Yeah, exactly.
She says, wow, your book was so good. I was having a hard time editing because I got drawn into it. So I get that from beta readers too. Sometimes they'll tell me that.
Well, that's a good sign on one hand. It's a little bit frustrating on the other.
Yeah.
But all right. And so let's see. What else can we cover? So if you had anything else that you could say to the audience, what exactly would you tell them?
Well, for readers, the biggest thing they can do is leave reviews. To me, that's authors love reviews. I mean, even bad reviews, I don't necessarily mind if there was at least some thought put into it. It's like, if the book sucked, it's not a good review. So that doesn't really do you any good.
No.
But, if there's some thought put into the review and then real criticism that makes sense, then love it. But reviews are the biggest thing, and I also like to hear from them, whether it's through Facebook, social media. I mean, obviously I don't want them knocking on my door all the time, but Facebook, emails, whatever, and I post all that stuff in the back of my books, all my social media. So, at least for me, and I think most authors, we love hearing from people who read the books and getting feedback from them, and hopefully building some type of personal relationship with them, at least in such a you know who they are and call them by first name and things like that. Those are the things I think, at least for the readers out there, to do with authors that they really enjoy.
Yeah,
I don't mind hearing. I think there probably are some that don't want to hear. Obviously you have those who hide up in the hills and never want to be bothered. But I think that's the small amount, and especially for indie authors, we always love hearing, and definitely leave reviews.
Yes,
Amazon especially.
Yeah, reviews matter, and I think people underestimate how important that is. That's kind of like how we know how good a job we've done. If you don't review, we don't know. And so we're kind of just left guessing as to whether or not our content is doing what we want it to do and whether it's serving you the way we want it to serve you. So.
Yeah, it was nothing better than a review that when they write the review, they write something in there and you go, wow, they actually got what I was trying to get across in that book or whatever. Like the homeless veteran short story that I did, The Case of Invisible Souls, I got a lot of feedback about people saying, oh, absolutely, this is a horrible thing that a lot of our veterans are out on the street. They really shouldn't be. They've served our country and have done things, put their lives on the line for us. And now they're homeless, and that should not be the case.
So let me ask you.
Those are the things that always feel good.
Did you have experience being homeless before you wrote that book?
I did not. Thankfully, that's never happened to me. The idea kind of came from seeing the guy on the street with his sign that I'm a veteran, I'm homeless and things like that. And I made a fictional homeless shelter. There are some homeless shelters here in Denver that are fairly well known, but I made a fictional one, and the name of the shelter was The Mission of the Invisible Soul. I think sometimes you see them, but you don't see them, and that's the thing with homeless.
It's actually very true. Actually, I work with the homeless which is why it kind of caught me, your topic. And one of the things that they have said is that some of them will go 3 years without hearing the sound of their own name being spoken. Can you imagine 3 years?
Yeah.
Nobody even knows your name. Nobody calls you by name. Nobody looks at you. I mean, I'll tell you another guy that I know. He went to serve with the Sisters of Charity in Calcutta, and they had him go get somebody who had been thrown into the gutters. And the guy had been there 6 months at least. And yeah, hadn't bathed in that time, and he hadn't, taken care of himself. So he had a pretty good stink going on. Took him a couple of hours to get him bathed and into bed. And then he kind of came to and started barking and growling at them. And the guy's like, I thought he was out of his mind. And after a couple of days, it occurred to me, no, he's been in the gutter so long that the only people who have talked to him are the dogs that are passing by, and he's speaking their language. It took him a while to remember how to speak human. So yeah, that's kind of we don't usually have it, I would say, that bad, but it's rough. It's definitely rough. And for our veterans to come home and find that to be their reception, that's kind of a sad situation.
Yes, and especially with the huge cost overruns going on at the VA center that's over here in Aurora that's being built, and I actually comment about that in the book. It's a shame that all that money, it's probably going to be a great facility, but it's just way too much money being wasted there that could be used to help. And there are programs out there, and I talk about those programs in the short story, but obviously if you're homeless, you can't always find those because you don't have social media. You can't go on the web and look at stuff like that. So yeah,
it can definitely be challenging.
Yeah.
Well, I appreciate you taking the time to, bring attention to that issue in your book. That's pretty, courageous, because a lot of people don't want to hear about it, but I think that's awesome. But all right. Well, thank you, Randy, for coming on board, and thank you for being part of the show. And we will look for The Cave of the Invisible Souls on Amazon and see what we can get. Thank you so much, and you have a great afternoon.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you for joining me on this week's episode of Behind the Covers. Wasn't that exciting? I just love the fact that he's going out there and talking about veterans and about the issues they have and about how likely they are to end up homeless and what happens to them when they get there. And that's a tough issue to cover, and he's done a great job. So I really want to encourage you to go look for Randy Weir and The Case of the Invisible Souls, because, man, that's an eye-opener. And while you're looking at The Case for the Invisible Souls, if you want to pick up my copy of The Poverty Diaries, that's another good place to get some in-depth look at what it's like for people who are going through poverty, because I've been there. First time I was homeless, I was 19 and pregnant. The people who could have taken me in wouldn't. The people who couldn't take me in, well, they couldn't. And so for 3 weeks in the middle of the Texas summer, my husband and I were sleeping in a car with nowhere else to go. It's a rough place to be, believe me. Once you've gotten there, it's so hard to get back out. People are like, well, they want to be there because they've made those choices. The truth is, you don't want to be in poverty. You don't want to be homeless. You just don't know what else to do. So at any rate, I really want to thank you for joining me with Randy Weir and The Case of the Invisible Souls. Next week, we're going to be talking to Keenan Knight about his book, Alex's Tales of the Magical Kingdom. And he is a friend of mine who is really special, near and dear to my heart. He was one of my first writers to join me in my Elkville County Writers Group. I think you've heard me talk about that before. And if you hadn't, we'll discuss it a little bit during next week's episode. But again, thank you for joining me. Remember to look for the Kids Can Write workshop. If you want to have me host a workshop in your city and bring Kids Can Write, or bring my writing for kids, for adults to your town, just send me an email. If you can get at least 10 people, I will be there. I promise I will be there. All right? As long as it's national. Now, internationally, you'll need to get a few more because I just have to cover the cost of the ticket. But I love to travel, I love to help teach writing, and I love to be part of your life. So just shoot me an email and let me know how to connect with you. Thanks for watching and have a great week.
This has been Behind the Covers with host and author Brandy Miller. Behind the Covers is a 40-day writer production, produced and mixed by Randall Miller. For additional information about the show, advertising opportunities, booking, and more, please visit 40daywriter.com. Behind the Covers is copyright 2018. All rights reserved. Join us next week and explore more of the world of writing and publishing on Behind the Covers.